So if we move over, inshallah, to our theology program, I think we had about just less than 30 students, 27 or something students in that. Again, there were probably less that used to come on site than those who used to, mashallah, very diligently. There's a number of students who were on track that listened to the entire program over the course of the 8 or 9 months that we were doing it. Now the theology program was split into two, which I detailed last year. It's actually two aspects to it. So half of it, the full theology program, which was 9 hours. This year it's going to be 2.5 times 3, which means 7.5 hours approximately. Last year it was actually 369 hours. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday evenings. So what we had in here is that half of it dealt with the classical sources. So we took two texts. One was Sharh al-Aqida al-Tahawiyya of Maydani, and alhamdulillah that was covered. So you got the Maturidi understanding. Then we took the Sharh al-Kharida al-Bahiyya, and that was quite an interesting text because initially it starts off as being very terse, very refined, very particular, and the Arabic is very challenging. And then after that it becomes very, very easy after about 20% of the book. But it gives you an understanding of the Ash'ari side of things. When you have the two together, it complements each other because the order is not the same. So when you've studied the sifat in here, then you get to refine them in the other text. And then another discussion would come before in the other text, and you then take it in the Kharida. Then after that, once the Sharh al-Aqida al-Tahawiyya of Maydani was completed, then we started looking at Qunawi's commentary. So we did several selections of that. We weren't able to cover the whole commentary because that wasn't intended either. So that was the Arabic part of it. The other aspect of it is where primarily Ustad Imran and Dr. Safaruk, they dealt with that. And I'm going to leave it to Ustad Imran to explain what we did last year in overall, and how we're going to maybe adjust that for next year. But that was a very, very ambitious program. And the reason for it is that we covered several different things in there, starting from, you could say, Plato and Aristotle, because we live in the West, much of the Western philosophy, Western understanding of the world, about life, about the brain, about the heart. I don't think that's a big discussion on the heart, but about the hereafter, whether there is a hereafter. A lot of that comes primarily through Aristotle and Plato, and it goes down, it filters, changes, adjusts, gets replaced, gets critiqued. So the major thinkers that we dealt with, what this course gave me, because I was listening, when I wasn't teaching the other part of it, I was listening. One of the greatest benefits of this is that you then begin to understand what feminism is actually all about. Where does the whole issue about religion and science, where does it converge and where does it go wrong? Right? Where does, for example, a lot of what you read in the media, and a lot of the onslaught against Islam, a lot of the postmodernist ideas, right, that are basically founded in existentialism and hermeneutics, the way they look at texts and so on. It just gives you an understanding. For any alim, really, this understanding is so important, because this is the kind of thought process, the mentality, the ideas that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and we just get caught up in that, and we don't know how to respond because we don't know where it's coming from, on what foundations is it based. When you understand, you can immediately tell that, okay, this is coming from an empirical perspective. This is coming from an existential issue. Now, that was, mashallah, diligently taught, and the amount of hours and subjects that were covered in there. One of our supporters, right, where I mentioned him earlier, who actually took the course as well, is Prince Ghazi, who is a philosopher in his own right, because he studied all of Plato's books. He's actually got 2 PhDs on philosophy subjects. He took the whole course, and I was surprised that he was always on time. he didn't lag behind too much. Within 2 weeks, he would have, he would never have more than probably 2 or 3 lessons outstanding. He was on the ball. And we wanted to change the course slightly. He says, no, you're not going to change the course. This is probably the most unique course that you have. And it basically is so unique. He reckons that nobody else, no other university, forget Islamic university, non-Muslim university is not even providing the scope that we're providing. Because we're dealing with lots of stuff in there, right? Evolution, gender fluidity, artificial intelligence. There's just so much that's been dealt with in there that it's quite unique. So if somebody really wants to understand, and I think anybody who's really wants to become aware of how to deal with a lot of the common questions and contemporary challenges, this course is very, very important. It can sound a bit daunting. Some aspects of it are daunting, but look, if you don't understand the whole thing, that's fine, right? At least you can take back a lot and get an understanding of where things are coming from. So I'm going to let Ustad Imran, unfortunately Dr. Safaruk was supposed to be here. He was unable to come today. He had to pull out the last yesterday. But Ustad Imran, he'll do his part. And again, if you have any questions about these things, we're going to take them later.
Okay, Jazakumullah khair. Just to elaborate and add to what Mufti Sahib said, in terms of the course structure, we had innumerable aims and objectives and sections to do, and alhamdulillah we managed to do a lot of them, but we weren't able to do many of them simply due to the fact that we ran out of time in some areas. But because we covered the topics in a lot of detail, it just time ran out as such. But I try to enumerate in terms of what we actually did and in terms of what topics inshallah we're going to carry on with. So areas that we explored were arguments for God. So we looked at the cosmological argument, the ontological argument, the design argument. We looked at the whole notion of the concept of God. So what does it mean, the word God? What is the concept behind that? How do we equate or how do we resolve the issue of omnipotence, God's power, with reference to, for example, paradoxes? Can God create a stone that he cannot lift himself? You've heard of that paradox, haven't you? Or, for example, how do we reconcile the issue of God's ilm, God's knowledge, with the issue of free will, and so on and so forth? So we looked at the arguments for God's existence. We looked at arguments against God's existence. So atheists have arguments against God's existence. They give arguments like arguments such as divine hiddenness. If there is God and God is all loving, how come most people don't recognize God or they can't find God? Why is God hidden in such a way? If there is God and he is all powerful and all loving, then why is there evil in the universe as such? Right? Why is there so much evil, and so on and so forth? So we looked at arguments for, we looked at arguments against, and the benefit of looking at those particular areas and those themes was primarily it fed into Mufti Saab's theology section, because in the theology text that you look at arguments for God's existence, you look at God's attributes and sifat, and we looked at this in terms of a broader sense from from a philosophical perspective. So much of those discussions about God's existence, the concept, the attributes, a lot of this stuff, if you go to university, it'll be a full module in terms of a BA or an MA course, but we started with that in order to provide a foundation for Mufti Saab's course. And then subsequently after that we went to other areas related to science and religion. We looked at the whole issue of philosophy of science, what is science. We looked at the whole issue of methodology of science, induction, deduction. We looked at all these kind of paradoxes. Then we looked at in terms of case studies, okay, so what's the reconciliation of religion and science? What are the different paradigms? I know everyone's probably heard of Richard Dawkins in this room and at home, and we know Richard Dawkins is a very famous proponent of the position that science and religion are in conflict. They call it the warfare paradigm, but there are other paradigms as well. So if you look at our mutakallimin, they had an integrationist paradigm with science and religion. So we explored different paradigms in terms of science and how we can understand science and religion. We looked at case studies, we looked at evolution in a lot of detail. SubhanAllah, we had about at least 9 hours on just evolution in terms of exploring what evolution was, intelligent design, looking at it from the issue of problems within the evidences. So we had 2 guest speakers with regards to this. You had Mulana Uthman Ali, who basically is doing loads of YouTube videos. You put him in YouTube. He actually did about 6 hours, and then we had Mufti Zamir Rahman, who came in and did a whole theological rejoinder. So we put a lot of emphasis in terms of those areas. We looked at quantum mechanics, and then after that we looked at some areas which you don't necessarily really explore much at university, areas of sociology. So how does sociology and religion interact? How does psychology and religion interact? So everyone's probably heard of Freud, and everyone's probably heard of some of his psychological or psychoanalysis theory, but it has a massive bearing on religion. People don't appreciate that much of the modern realm is based upon Freud's understanding of religion as being a trauma, yeah, as being a suffering that human beings go through, like a neurosis or an illusion. We looked at the whole issue of politics as well. We looked at Karl Marx. We looked at the issue of ethics, so the utilitarian principles and so on and so forth. So I know I'm chucking a lot of key words here to you, but we actually went through it very systematically over a period of at least 30 odd weeks. Alhamdulillah, we broke it down to different modules. So what we've done this year, inshallah, we're hoping to modularize everything in a more succinct way, so that it provides people the opportunity to come in and do different types of modules, like God's existence, God's concept, science and religion, the issue of sociology and psychology. So as Mufti Sahib said, what's the point of this? One is that we all have shubuhat at the end of the day. I know many people here are ulama, have advanced degrees in Islamic studies, but there are always going to be doubts at the end of the day, and this is part of Iman anyway, to have doubts. So it's for personal satisfaction in terms of being able to provide a rational answer to yourself to the best that you can do. And we know in our tradition not all answers are rational. Sometimes we leave it to the realms of the gap where we don't know, but not all questions are left to the gap. So God's existence is not a question that is said, well, alhamdulillah, we leave it to Allah. I believe in Allah because Allah said so. Is this how our scholars argued this? Fine, maybe some questions about God's attributes are questions off the gap, but there are many questions that we can give evidence for. So one is personal satisfaction of the beliefs that we hold. And actually I forgot to mention, we actually had this whole section on Islam as well, in terms of looking at miracles. What is the miracle of Islam? Why is Islam true and not Christianity or, for example, Judaism? And Ustaz Safruq, who's an expert in terms of Arabic balagha, he went into the whole issue of the Arabic language, looked into the issue of the Quranic miracle, the linguistical miracle that aspect. I think Mufti Sahib said you are going to touch on the tafsir course. That's something that's not discussed very often. You get discussions of Quran and science, Quran and in terms of prophecies, but very rarely do you get the Quranic miracle as Allah has articulated himself, which is the linguistic miracle. Allah has challenged, hasn't he? And we talked about that as well in terms of those miracle aspects. So personal satisfaction is one issue, but then obviously as ulama, as muftis and so on and so forth, people come. Obviously, people are in charge of flocks and communities, and there are people who are going to come and they want solutions and answers. And if they can't find solution and answer from the ulama, then at the end of the day, it somehow brings shubuhat into them in terms of the whole religion. Because an alim and a mufti is a representation of the religion. That's what he is or she is. And if they can't provide a cogent answer, then that somehow, and this is incorrect, it's fallacious reasoning, but it somehow, for that individual who's asked that question and not got the answer, it really breaks down that religion. You think to yourself, this religion has no answers if this is what these people have. So it's to provide our community who are suffering now. So many people out there have so many shubuhat. They have so many doubts. There's so many issues. Only yesterday I was watching a video about transgenderism and so on and so forth. How do we deal with that in terms of Islam? Gender fluidity. Most schools are now going to be having unisex toilets. What's the Islamic perspective on that? How do you give a rational answer rather than saying, blasphemy, Allahu Akbar, or something, silly that is equated to Islam? How do we give a rational, cogent answer which Islam gives? So, alhamdulillah, those are kind of areas we discuss. Some of the vernacular, the terminology can be difficult, but alhamdulillah, this is something that we're going to be working on this year to make sure that we start at a very basic level, build you up. We have Google Classroom as well in terms of the FFC program. We had loads of stuff on that. Ustaz Safruq was answering loads of questions. So we have a lot of interaction as well in terms of those issues. So you're not basically coming to lectures and you're left to your own devices. There's a lot of interaction in terms of if you want to know answers, you want to explore things further, there's a lot of resources we provide. So we did it last year. It went okay, I would say. We're trying to optimize it, inshallah, make it better. But as Mufti Sahib says, it's a very useful course in those issues in terms of personal as well as dawah purposes, in terms of positive dawah, where we can positively go out and give dawah, and negative dawah in terms of negating those things about the religion of Islam, those kind of controversial things, those kind of taboo things that are necessarily, not always dealt with, or just, bulja, baad mein, yeah, later. That's sometimes the elders are right, leave it sometimes, yeah, but not everything can be left sometimes. There are many things that shouldn't be left, and if they're left, then they cause major doubts. So I'll pass it back to Mufti Sahib, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair for that. So the half which is related to more the philosophical aspects, and not the classical Arabic text, but what Ustad Imran's on, that was also, you could just take that separately, which is called a faith foundation. That's what it was called, a faith foundations course. And again, we're going to make it into modules. So if you can't take the whole course for the whole year, you could take one module, the science module or the the theology module, or it'll be on the site very soon if you don't want to take the whole course. I just want to mention, what Ustad Imran mentioned. He mentioned a number of names, whether that be Karl Marx, Popper, Freud, Kant, right? These are the Western prophets, basically. Europe hasn't had a prophet, right? I don't think there's any prophet. There's no prophet that was sent to Europe. God knows best, Allah knows best, really, but there's no history of that. So they've imported Jesus, peace be upon him, and then there's the Judeo, and then there's the Muslims who've come in. But in terms of the so-called modern prophets, right, in that sense, then you've got these famous thinkers. Now, the average person on the street, or the person who's writing the article, or the person who's giving the interview, who's critiquing Islam or trying to push a certain agenda or a certain idea of feminism or whatever, they're never going to say that this is a feminist idea, or that this is empiricism, or this is science. Well, science they may use, or they may never call it hermeneutics or whatever. They may never even have to quote Freud or Kant or Marx or anybody else, if it's an issue of sociology. They will just provide the idea. It's actually it's ingrained, right? It's like the way Muslims will speak about Islamic issues without necessarily quoting, because it's so common. It's become common nomenclature, right? It's become common terminology, common ideas. So they won't even know that this actually comes from Freud, or that this comes from Kant, or this is an idea that's based in existentialism, or whatever the case is. But this is what the Western idea is based on. And if we don't know what it's based on, then it's very difficult to try to attack it, because what we're doing here in this course is you take the idea and then we show the criticisms against it, both from a Western perspective and from an Islamic perspective. And that's very interesting. All of these ideas, they've actually been critiqued by Westerners themselves, right? Other scientists, other thinkers. So we're showing how they're critiqued, and then we can say, okay, this is maybe the Muslim way, the Islamic way of looking at it. So don't get put off by the big names and the big ideas and all that, because we have to understand them and then be able to, inshallah, deal with what's going on outside. I want to move on to the last course.